Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Deep Dive Knowledge Talk. Greetings to all. Today, we'll discuss a study that challenges the notion that language is primarily a tool for thinking. Instead, it argues that language evolved as a communication tool. To begin, could you elaborate on the brain network that supports language abilities in humans?
The brain uses a special network of areas to help us understand and produce language. This network is different from the network that helps us think and reason. This shows that language is not necessary for thought, but rather a tool for communication.
Thank you for that concise explanation. Could you further elaborate on the evidence for a double dissociation between language and thought? How does this dissociation support the argument that language is primarily a tool for communication?
The double dissociation between language and thought shows that language is not necessary for thought, and that having language does not guarantee the ability to think. For example, people with aphasia, a language disorder, can have difficulty understanding and producing language, but they can still think and solve problems. And people with autism spectrum disorder may have difficulty with social communication, but they can have advanced thinking abilities in other areas. This evidence suggests that language is not necessary for thought, and that it is a separate ability that evolved for communication.
Thank you for providing those examples of double dissociation. Could you further elaborate on the properties of language that suggest it is optimized for communication? How do these properties differ from those of systems designed for thinking?
Properties of language that suggest it is optimized for communication. Compositionality. The meaning of a sentence can be determined by the meaning of its parts and the way they are combined. This makes language flexible and efficient, as new words and phrases can be created to express new ideas. Ambiguity. Words and phrases can have multiple meanings. This can be useful for communication, as it allows speakers to leave out information that listeners can infer from the context. Redundancy. Information is often repeated in different ways. This makes language more robust to noise and errors, and it also helps listeners to understand the message. Learnability. Languages are relatively easy to learn, even for children. This suggests that language is designed to be communicated and understood by others. Properties of systems designed for thinking. Precision. Thoughts are typically precise and unambiguous. This is because thinking is used to solve problems and make decisions, and precision is essential for these tasks. Efficiency. Thoughts are typically efficient, meaning that they use the least amount of resources necessary to achieve a goal. This is because thinking is often constrained by time and energy. Flexibility. Thoughts can be flexible and creative, allowing us to generate new ideas and solve problems in novel ways. This is because thinking is not limited by the rules of language. Overall, the properties of language suggest that it is optimized for communication, while the properties of systems designed for thinking suggest that they are optimized for problem-solving and decision-making.
Thank you for the detailed explanation of the properties of language and systems designed for thinking. Could you further elaborate on the implications of these differences? How do these differences support the argument that language is primarily a tool for communication rather than a tool for thought?
The differences between the properties of language and the properties of systems designed for thinking support the argument that language is primarily a tool for communication, rather than a tool for thought in several ways. Language is flexible and efficient for communication, while systems designed for thinking are precise and efficient for problem solving. This suggests that language has evolved to meet the demands of communication, rather than the demands of thought. Language is learnable, while systems designed for thinking are not. This suggests that language is designed to be communicated and understood by others, rather than to be used for internal thought. Language is often ambiguous, while systems designed for thinking are typically precise. This suggests that language is designed to convey meaning in a way that is flexible and context-dependent, rather than to represent thoughts in a precise and unambiguous way. Overall, the differences between the properties of language and the properties of systems designed for thinking suggest that language is better suited for communication than for thought. Implications of these differences for the language for thought hypothesis. The language for thought hypothesis proposes that language is necessary for thought. However, the differences between the properties of language and the properties of systems designed for thinking suggest that language is not necessary for thought. In fact, the evidence suggests that language is a relatively recent evolutionary development, and that humans were able to think and reason long before they developed language. Implications of these differences for the language for communication hypothesis. The language for communication hypothesis proposes that language is primarily a tool for communication. The differences between the properties of language and the properties of systems designed for thinking support this hypothesis. They suggest that language has evolved to meet the demands of communication, and that it is well suited for this purpose.
Thank you for providing those insightful implications. Could you further elaborate on the evolutionary perspective of the language for communication hypothesis? How does this hypothesis account for the emergence and development of language in humans?
Evolutionary perspective of the language for communication hypothesis. The language for communication hypothesis proposes that language evolved primarily to meet the demands of communication. This hypothesis is supported by the fact that language is well suited for communicating complex ideas and information, and that it is used for a wide variety of communicative purposes, such as sharing knowledge, telling stories, and persuading others. From an evolutionary perspective, the ability to communicate effectively would have provided a significant advantage to early humans. It would have allowed them to cooperate more effectively, to share information about food and danger, and to pass on knowledge and skills to their offspring. How the language for communication hypothesis accounts for the emergence and development of language in humans. The language for communication hypothesis suggests that language emerged and developed in humans as a way to meet the demands of increasingly complex social and cognitive needs. As humans began to live in larger and more complex groups, they needed a way to communicate more effectively about a wider range of topics. This led to the development of more sophisticated language skills, including the ability to use symbols, grammar, and syntax. The language for communication hypothesis also suggests that language played a key role in the development of human cognition. By allowing humans to share and discuss ideas, language helped to create a shared pool of knowledge and understanding. This, in turn, led to the development of more complex and sophisticated thinking skills. Evidence supporting the language for communication hypothesis. There is a growing body of evidence to support the language for communication hypothesis. For example, studies have shown that language is used primarily for communication rather than for thought. Language is well suited for communicating complex ideas and information. Language plays a key role in the development of human cognition. Overall, the evidence suggests that language evolved primarily as a tool for communication, and that it has played a key role in the development of human cognition.
Thank you for providing that comprehensive evolutionary perspective. Could you further elaborate on the implications of the language for communication hypothesis for understanding the relationship between language and culture? How does language shape culture, and how does culture shape language?
Implications of the language for communication hypothesis for understanding the relationship between language and culture. The language for communication hypothesis has a number of implications for understanding the relationship between language and culture. How language shapes culture. Language is a key part of culture. It is used to transmit cultural values, beliefs, and practices from one generation to the next. Language can also shape the way that people think about the world. For example, the words that a language has available can influence the way that people categorize and perceive the world around them. Language can also be used to create and express new ideas and concepts. This can lead to the development of new cultural practices and beliefs. How culture shapes language. Culture can also shape language. For example, the values and beliefs of a culture can influence the way that language is used. Culture can also lead to the development of new words and phrases. For example, the English language has adopted many words from other languages, such as sushi from Japanese and taco from Spanish. Culture can also influence the way that language is pronounced and spoken. For example, different dialects of a language can develop in different regions of a country. Overall, the relationship between language and culture is a complex and dynamic one. Language and culture are constantly shaping each other, and they are both essential to human society. Here are some specific examples of how language and culture interact. The Inuit language has a large number of words for different types of snow. This reflects the importance of snow in Inuit culture. The Japanese language has a complex system of honorifics. This reflects the importance of social hierarchy in Japanese culture. The English language has a large number of words for different types of food. This reflects the importance of food in English culture. These are just a few examples of how language and culture are intertwined. The relationship between language and culture is a fascinating and complex one, and it is one that is constantly evolving.
Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found this discussion on the nature of language and thought to be as fascinating as I did. As we've learned, the notion that language is primarily a tool for thought has been challenged. Instead, evidence suggests that language evolved as a means of communication, with brain networks for language differing from those for thinking. The double dissociation between language and thought further supports this claim. Individuals with language disorders may still possess the ability to think, while those with autism spectrum disorder may have difficulties with social communication, but demonstrate advanced thinking skills. The properties of language, such as compositionality, ambiguity, redundancy, and learnability, facilitate effective communication. Conversely, systems for thinking prioritize precision, efficiency, and flexibility. These differences indicate that language is optimized for communication rather than thought. The language for communication hypothesis proposes that language evolved to fulfill communicative needs, driven by increasingly complex social and cognitive requirements. Language has had a profound impact on human cognition, enabling knowledge sharing and collective understanding. The relationship between language and culture is bidirectional. Language shapes culture by conveying values and influencing perception, while culture shapes language through values, vocabulary, and pronunciation. This intricate interplay highlights the significance of both language and culture in human societies. Thank you again for joining us. I encourage you to continue exploring this fascinating topic and share your thoughts with others.